I'm going to start slip slapping my background, blending in colors, and I like to use a fairly large brush. I'm going to use a 1-inch brush. We're going to start down at the bottom. Now, this can be a patio stone, can be anything. This happens to be one of the rhubarb leaves. So I've moistened my brush, and I'm going to start at the bottom with black green. I'll work the outside edges later on. You never want to use your best brush if you're working on something like this that has all these crevices and cracks that you'll need to sneak into. So again, I start by applying my first color. Partially, maybe about a quarter of the way up is where I'm going to go for. Now, pieces like this use a fair bit of paint. Okay, so I'm just going to wipe my brush. I don't really need to wash it. And I'm now picking up my laurel, and I just apply it right next to my black green, and I'm going to work it slip slapping. Now we call, and every now and then I'll get in my crack and crevice with my chisel of my brush, but that's back and forth working my brush. I'm just checking to make sure that it's in the camera. It is. Okay, so just back and forth working the colors together. So you see how they nicely meld into each other. I'll get back my black green and just work between these colors. I still want it to stay relatively dark at the bottom. So that's where I'll go back into the black green. And then just continue working my way upwards. If you were, like I say, when you're working on one of these crevice pieces, like the rhubarb leaves, it takes a little bit longer back and forth between my colors. And just getting, you kind of have to look from all angles when you're doing this, because where you're seeing in these cracks. Now, if you like to make one of these rhubarb leaves, there are lots of how-to kind of little tutorials on Pinterest and YouTube. And these ones, we prefer when we're painting on them to be the flatter ones. A lot of times you'll build the mound with sand and do that to create the actual sculptured shape of the rhubarb leaf. But to paint on, it's a little bit easier if it's flatter like this. So now I'm up near my top. I'm going to come up to the top and just start up in here. I don't clean the brush, just pick up my bleach sand. I'm going to get a little bit more moisture on my brush because it doesn't want to get into my cracks up here. And so with this bleach sand, I work down into the laurel. This one is just a nice, simple slip slap. And we talk about slip slap. That's using your brush going back and forth, this way, that way, using little X's as you do it. You want to see brush stroke marks. If you see them, that's great. If you don't, well, it's not an issue. But we are not looking for smooth, smooth, smooth. You know, your transition between what's happening in here. And if you're having it dry too quickly for you, if you have a squirt bottle, those misters that we use, that works very well. I'm getting a little more Laurel to soften this up here. There, that's better. So, and I realize that that's possibly not under the camera either, so I'm just going to slide it down a little bit so you can see. Work into some of these cracks. Nice and soft. So the transition goes really pretty from the black green to the Laurel, then from the Laurel to the bleach sand. So it's a nice, soft, graduated mix. Nice and soft. Okay. So that's our slip slapping for our background. Now I'm just going to go ahead and work around my outer edges with I'll use a chip brush for that and blend my colors together. I've dried my leaf, and so what I'm doing now is I'm taking a natural sponge, and the crazier, hairier they are, the more I like them. Now for this one in particular, normally we wet our sponge, squeeze it out really good so it's just slightly damp. This one, I've wet it, squeezed it just into my toweling a little bit, but my plan here is to keep it a little thinner. So I want my sponging to be a little bit thinner. So I've loaded it with some plantation pine, and I'm going to start down on the bottom. And what I'm doing is just putting in a little bit of background foliage. And because my sponge is wet, it's going to bleed out. And that's where I'm heading for. That's what I'm looking for. Now I'm dipping my top part of my sponge into avocado. So we're going from plantation pine to avocado. And I want to make sure that it's still wet, that it still does my bleeding for me. And I want it, so if it's staying, I'll just tap and scrunch my sponge a little bit using the wet part or the clean part of the sponge to come back and kind of sop up a wee bit of that heavier paint. I don't want so much of that. So this is just giving me a little bit, and I'm trying not to make it even, you know, not completely follow the shape of my rock. I know it's very hard to do. It doesn't matter if it's a circle or if it's a stepping stone that's square, whatever, you tend to want to follow that shape. But really what I'm doing here, I just want to have a little bit of bleeding out foliage. I'm going to clean my sponge out. I'm actually going to grab another sponge. I have a whole pile of these. Different shape sponge for different jobs. But I'm just going to come back. There we go. I'm liking that a bit better. I'm just, with a clean sponge, I'm coming in and I'm removing some of it. Just depends how much you have in an area. I like that better. And now with there hardly anything on here, I'm just going to come up and fade out a little of that extra over here. There, that looks good for me. Okay, so I'll dry this and then we can go ahead and transfer on what we want in our pattern. Okay, so that's our next step, is to transfer the pattern on. All right. So I've lightly put my pattern on. I had to use dark transfer in the light areas and light transfer in the dark areas. And I want to add some fern. nice fern stencil. In my pattern, I'm going to put a tracing of this for you if you would like to trace this on if you don't have one, and it doesn't have to go on. But so I'm starting with black, green, and a dome stippler down at the bottom. Pick up a little avocado, work back and forth into the dark. So I'm going to fade from the black, green, then I'm picking up a little bit of aloe. Aloe's a nice, kind of a little softer than celery, not quite as yellow, but in that tone. But it'll go nicely with this piece on this background. And being that it is on the rhubarb leaf, I have lots of veins in places where nothing is going to actually grab because of the dents in it. But you see how soft and lacy that looks. So I'm going to have a little of that. I'll flip my stencil, go in different places. Usually I'll wipe it with a baby wipe. And I'm going to come over here and I'll just add a little bit more of the ferny. Now I know I'm going over top of my line drawing in places, but I'd rather have it look like it's popping out from behind nicely. Black, green into my avocado, and I just work back to the tips. I want the tips to get a little of the lighter, and then we're picking up a little bit of aloe. As I get up to the outer edge, that aloe. So this is just going to be a soft ferny background that's going to poke out. I'm just going to check. Yeah, he's worked out in between my leaves, so petals, pardon me. So it's just giving me a little bit of a soft, airy background in here. I'll just apply a little bit more in a few places, and it's going to be more of the same. I'm going to use my number 10. I'm picking up avocado, and I'm using my brush on the chisel to apply my stems. So we're going to come all the way up to the center. Just chisel the stem down. I've got a little stem down at the bottom on this guy. And then this stem comes through this flower. You probably can't even see that all. I'm going to pick up on the dirty brush some of the aloe, and I'm going to come to the middle of my stem. I'm not going up to the top where I started or down to the bottom. So it's just going to streak through the middle to add some highlight. I'm actually going to pick up a little bit of bleach sand, work it in on the dirty brush, and just actually strengthen up that highlight more to the middle. And that's, I missed all this little guy down at the bottom. So that's how we are going to highlight these stems. All right. For the little stems that come up and hold our little flowerets, I'm going to drag my brush, I'm loading it into a little plantation pine, avocado, and then just touching into the aloe. So I've got all these colors on my brush. So as I streak them in and make these little lines, the aloe, I'm going to go a little bit more there. Do you see how I'm having multiple colors on here showing up? The odd one might have more of the dark. And I'm going to come out further here and there because you're only going to see certain parts of the line, right? Like certain parts of the stem, because other parts are going to be covered in little flowerets. So right now I'm just kind of picking up more plantation pine and aloe and not as much of the avocado. So I go through and I'm just putting in these little bits of stems. You'll see bits here and there. Drag them across. Now it always depends on how much our background has of the light in it. And I'm going to pull a little bit more. I'm going to go into now, I'm going to pick up a bit of that bleached sand. And I'm just going to come and hit a few of these little stems, just so we have a little bit more highlight in there. Now I'm going to go with my plantation pine and a little bit of aloe and drag the little pieces coming down from the bottom. So we want them to be a little bit darker. And if I'm only getting, which is happening right now, that I'm only getting plantation pine on them, it doesn't matter. I can come back and add a little highlight of my aloe and just kiss a little bit on them. So we have these, they're almost like little stragglers that hang down off of them. Okay, so we have a little of that in there. And I can just come back and touch a little of it. And you might even see what you want after, once we get our little flowerets on here. We may actually decide to get into a little of the black green. And if I put a smidge of the black green in with my plantation pine, just pick up the two, and I have, do you see how that's kind of lifting a little of what's inside here? I'm just kind of pulling a few through there. There. So that's just, it wasn't too much, but just a little of the black green. So we'll put a little of that in there. We're going to do the same thing on all of them. And then we're going for our 0 round. I'm going to dig that up and I'll be back. I've got my number 2 round, and it's actually not my best one, and it's in a little bit of rough shape, which actually works perfect for this. Now, it just means you have to do more tapping if you have a good, your brush is in good shape. So I'm going to start with, and we start in our background. Do you see how, because my brush is in bad shape, how it gives me several little florets? And I come through here, and we're going to tap in a few through the back. So you're not going to see too much. And I'm going with my darkest color, which is not that dark, but it is the sand gray. So I won't come back down in there with highlighted pieces. So we come through, we're going to tap in our darker. Some places I've got heavier paint on there, so we will get, because we want some that you don't really see through. Some will be airy and lacy off the edge. That's the whole thing and the reason for this. It does look like lace when it's done, and that's the name Queen Anne's lace is no doubt how it's come. But we just go through and we add layer with our first color. Some places will go, do you see, I'll bring it down and I'm going to go right across. Some of these ones that come out, you're not going to see it on them all. Just tap in there. As you tap, it will splay open your brush, and you will get a few of these even if your brush isn't racked. But you never want to use your best one. If you have brushes, and never chuck brushes, right? Like we have these brushes, these are now, they're not ruined, they're specialty brushes. That's what we call them. So we just go through here, we're gonna tip our brush. I've scribbled in a background line there. If I miss it here and there, it's not gonna matter. So, and again, this is my first layer. So this one, the butterfly's legs will have to come back on, and I may get a little bit on him and I'll touch his wing up because I do want him to be in front of our flower once we're done. So he's gonna be in the front of the flower. I'll pop these in. They look so cute already. Liking it, liking it, liking it. This would be sweet on a birdhouse. This would be really cute on a watering can. There's all kinds of things I could think to put in the garden with this. Be lovely. Nice on a signboard for outside your home. I'm going to do one like that, blow it up a bit. So I've gone with that. Now I'm not bothering to clean my brush. I'm now going to go into light buttermilk. And as this sand gray dries, it does go gray, like a beige gray. So we're going to see that that's going to dry. I want to leave a few places where I only see that sand gray. I'm intending on bringing these out as a highlight, but the darker gray from underneath would be more shadowed. So the top has a bit more highlight, the light's hitting it more. So I'm going to come through with the bleach sand, or pardon me, light buttermilk. And we'll put that in. Now with the cracks in the rock, it works out lovely. It's beautiful. And we just come through, tap these on here, and then I go into some warm white. Now the warm white, I would kind of like, I would have been doing all of them, so by the time I came back with my warm white, it would end up going on top, not blending into the wet light buttermilk. So I will do the lightest at the end with the white. And do you see if I come off the end and I do a few little tappies, it gives a little bit more of that lacy appeal, just touching in here and there. Always tap in the center first so that you can sort of splay the tip of your brush open and come in there and just set in these tiny lacy pieces. So what I decided was that I was going to come back in and add a little highlight here and there on my branches. Not my branches, but the little, well, branches, I guess, that are holding up the piece. So, whoa, I wonder where he came from. Just a little highlight on a few of them. And this, I'm using the avocado toast. We haven't used it in this yet. I've come and I'm adding a little streak on my stems as well. It's just pulling a brighter green that's going to lift off of our back. I'm finding my stuff fading too much. I'm finding it too much fading into my background. So I'm adding this brighter highlight. Alrighty.